So let's talk about boundaries. This is a topic I really like to talk about. So there are a couple keys to boundaries, and I'm going to tell you what one of the most important one is, and it's actually the final step. So when we talk about boundaries, one of the things that we have to look at is what are the things that kind of trigger us with other people in situations, things that our internal sense of self that says that's not okay. And some of those things are intentional and some of those things are not intentional. And the thing that you have to figure out is where do you need to establish boundaries? And then additionally, are these boundaries something that you have to verbalize, or are these something that you do not need to verbalize? And I'm going to give you a couple scenarios. So when I was working in corporate America, one of the things that I was dealing with was a very high pressure job. And in this job, I was glued to my phone from the time I woke up in the morning to the time I went to bed. It didn't matter if it was on the weekend or not. And it was always because, oh, something's happening, or I'm gonna miss an email, or I gotta do something, or I gotta hop online. And I was in enterprise account, so it was very high stressful kind of client stuff. But I didn't sign a contract that said I was expected to be on call 24/7. That was never in, my employment. And I got to a point where I was starting to have physical anxiety because I was so dialed into this, and I was getting anxious about, what if I miss something? What if somebody says something? And then it's like, oh, you weren't online, or you didn't see it, or whatever. And eventually I said, I can't do this for my own health and well-being. So I said, how can I establish a boundary? And one of the things that I realized was I need to put my phone down. Plain and simple. I need to say, no, I'm going to check out. I'm going to have my me time. Whatever my me time is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I'm sitting on the couch and watching TV, who cares? But I don't need to look at my phone all the time for work. And, for me, that was kind of hard because I'm a single mom. And as a single mom, the idea of my employment and my paycheck is all on me, right? So I was always afraid of losing the job, right? If I don't do the job good enough, be the best. That, it'd be a black mark. Maybe they, fire me. Oh my God, what am I going to do? How am I going to take care of me and my kid? And I finally got to the point and I said, you know what? Legally, they can't do anything. And so I decided to take the approach where I told all of the project team, and, we're talking about 30 people, where it was like, look, if it's off hours and you need me, here's my personal cell phone. That's how you get a hold of me. I'll be dialed into that all the time. Because as a single mom, I am dialed into that in case something happens with my kid. And I stopped looking at my phone. And I had a couple situations where there were emails that were flying around at one point. And, my name was popping up, and when I came back online, Monday, and people were like, well, we tried to get hold of you. And I said, how? Via email? I told you how to get hold of me. And reminded them, if the problem is bad enough, then reach me on this number. Now, a really interesting thing happened. I actually thought that people would not respect that boundary. I really didn't think they would respect it. I thought it would just be like, oh, here's just a different number to get hold of her. But oddly enough, people did. And what was awesome about it was there were things just apparently could wait until the next day, until I got back online. And there were a couple times where they did engage me, but it made it so that when they did, I knew, oh, this is a problem, okay. But I started to get rid of the anxiety I was having as a result of not checking my phone, not being online all the time, not having this, anxiety tied to my job and, oh, I've got to be there and, I can't lose my job. And it was very freeing, very freeing. And it was a boundary that I put in place. I had that in place for 6 years. And it worked really well. So that's an example of setting a boundary where you tell people, this is my line and I need you to respect it. And then you're going to find out, right, who does and does not respect that line. Now, I'm going to give you an example of a boundary where you decide not to tell them the boundary, okay? So my mother, when she was alive, we had a complicated relationship, as a lot of people do with their parents. And that's my dog, Scooby. And I realized there were certain issues with her and I when we would have conversations. And I would, get really upset with her and not want to talk to her. And, sometimes get off the phone crying, or we'd be like, at the end of the phone. And I took a step back and I said, okay, well, what are the times that I'm successful in these conversations with my mom? And what are the times that I'm not successful with my mom? And I realized something very interesting. I realized that when I called my mom, or she called me, which she never called me, but when I called my mom and we kept the conversations to 20 minutes or less, we got off the phone all fine and happy. There was never a problem. We weren't fighting. I realized that once that clock started going to closer to like 30 minutes, well, maybe we'd start to get a little, with each other. If it got to 45 minutes, it went to about 50-50 on, we were probably going to be agitated. And if it went to an hour or longer, we were absolutely getting off the phone, like almost nuclear on each other and very angry and pent up. And there's that. The other thing I realized was there were certain topics that were triggers for both of us. My version of events of my childhood was not the version of events that she wanted to sit in the headspace of. And that was very frustrating because I wanted her to validate my reality, right? And she did not want to validate my reality because my reality was not pleasant. And my reality made her look like not the best mom, right? And that's not how she wanted to perceive herself. So when I looked at that and said, okay, well, I don't actually need her to validate my reality. I can validate my own reality. In fact, I don't need anybody else to validate my version of events, regardless of whether my version of events are right or wrong. I'm going to sit in the headspace of, I know what my reality is, and that's what I'm going with. So I decided that since we were never going to see eye to eye on our past, I just wasn't going to bring it up. We weren't even going to have the conversation about past events. And I wanted to see if I didn't bring it up, if she didn't bring it up either. And it turned out she didn't. She never brought up past events. So one of the things that happened when I made this change with her, I didn't tell her. I'm putting in boundaries because you blah, 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 blah. I decided, you know what? I'm going to quietly establish some boundaries. I am going to adhere to those boundaries. And I'm just going to kind of see if it starts to resolve some of the current day-to-day problems. And, I didn't tell her we're only talking for 20 minutes a day because, you get volatile. I didn't do that. And amazingly, our relationship improved. Now, I will tell you, from her perspective, her relationship with her daughter just got, it just got better, and it was just great. I talked to my daughter, blah, blah, blah. Now, on my side of the fence, my version became a little bit more of a facade because I felt like there were things that I couldn't be real about with her. And it was much more of, how's the weather? How's your day? Did you go for a walk? Blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, I wasn't willing to cut my mother off because, sometimes that's a really hard thing to do. And so I was okay sitting in the space of having a little bit more of a facade relationship, at least on my side of the house, as long as I was able to find a way that was calm. So I established boundaries with her where I did not communicate what those boundaries were going to be. And the relationship itself ended up becoming much more successful. Now, a lot of times people, when they're looking at boundary setting, there's a couple things that you've got to go through. First, you've got to recognize what are the things that are triggering to you that you feel are unacceptable. Okay, doesn't matter if it's family, partner, co-workers, children, whatever the case. So the first thing is, the awareness. The second thing is you have to define what the boundary looks like. Is this a boundary that I'm just going to put in place and I'm not going to say anything, or this is a boundary I'm going to articulate to somebody? This is not acceptable to me. And if so, you have to articulate it, because what's going to happen is you may have somebody who doesn't realize that that's a boundary for you. And now they're like, oh, okay. However, more often than not, the people know. The people know that, they're kind of being a shit. I'm just going to say. And so when you do verbalize that to somebody that, you believe needs to hear it, then an interesting thing starts to happen, okay? They're either going to start towing the line for your boundary, or they're going to completely just disregard and not care. Now, this is the key to your boundary settings, all right? You need to expect that the people you set boundaries with are not going to honor your boundaries. And this is where a lot of people go sideways with boundary setting, because they believe that, well, if I verbalize my boundary, people are just going to automatically abide by it. Chances are they won't. Chances are they weren't respecting you before, and they're still not going to respect you. And this is where it gets tough. So when you establish a boundary, you have to then go one step further and say, and if they fail to respect my boundary, what am I going to do? Okay? What am I going to do? And at that point, you have to figure out how you are going to enforce your boundary. Now, sometimes this is the place you don't want to go, because it means doing something drastic. And you don't really like that idea of the drasticness of it. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you have a family dinner every Sunday night, okay? And let's say that your brother-in-law, Johnny, okay, always says things that are extremely disturbing to you. And it doesn't matter if it was something that was personally directed towards you or something that you just have a personal issue with, but he always says these things and you have, an extreme degree of uncomfort with it. And as a result, you end up having these arguments, and then the family dinner spirals and So in this instance, right, you've told Johnny, I'm not okay with you saying these things, and Johnny just doesn't care. So now at this point, your boundary is, you know what? If you cannot, control yourself in this area for our family dinner, then me and my family just are not going to come. We're not going to come to the weekly family dinner. So one of two situations is going to happen at this point. All right. Either one, you're going to have the rest of your family all of a sudden start to have peer pressure around Johnny for Johnny to behave, because you know what? They want you at the family dinner, and this is unacceptable. And you may have to miss a family dinner or two in order for that point to be proven, okay? Because at that point, right, all of a sudden the chairs are empty where you guys were sitting. The cousins don't get to play together. So-and-so is upset because, they love having the conversation with you after dinner about whatever it is you like to talk about, all right? So all of a sudden there becomes this like family pressure around somebody to, hey, start towing the line, okay? We now are collectively saying we're not okay with it. So that's the first thing. Now, the second situation that could happen is the family does not get behind you. This is the tricky one. You have to then figure out, well, hold on. If they're not willing to get behind me, then that means they don't respect me. And if they don't respect you, why are you wasting your time in a situation with people who don't respect you? A lot of times with family, we feel that pull, right? We feel like we have to be part of it. Well, it's my family. And well, if I step away from my family, then I have no one. Well, I mean, I've got a lot of spiritual thoughts on the family stuff I'll talk about in other videos. But if they're not respecting you, then they don't even care if you're there or not. Sit in that space. And if they don't care if you're there or not, why do you care that you're there? Don't you want to be around people that do respect you, that do think you have value, and are willing to support you and stand up for you? That's what I would want. And personally, if I'm the person who has to stay alone, then I stay alone. I'm not going to really stand for that situation. I've even had that situation recently in my life where I made it clear I don't want to be around a couple, family members. And an interesting thing happened. I flat out told some that, look, you're going to have to choose me or her. And if I'm the odd one out, okay, I'm on out. I don't have to be the one you choose. If you choose her, well, then that says something. And interestingly enough, the other person involved decided to have a certain level of self-awareness, which is not always the case, and decided that, it's not fair that they have to choose who, we should all be able to be around. And I made it very clear that, her and I are at odds. And the only way that we're even going to be able to be in the same space is if the two of us agree to a couple rules and parameters, of things. And some of it is that we are not going to agree on certain things. And in other areas, I don't even want to talk to her about certain things, like at all. It's not something that I want to work through. It's not something that I need her validation on. I don't need her validation on my events just because she doesn't want, my version to be true, because it's much more impactful negatively to her if it is true. And, she came to a point where she said, okay, I'll agree to that stuff. So, now I'm in a place where, I was able to say, okay, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to stand in a place if I trust her, or I feel like 100% comfortable with her, but I'm at least at a point where the two of us are being mature enough to say, we each have boundaries and lines, and we're going to at least try to come to the table in a certain manner of speaking, and we're going to avoid these things so that collectively we can at least try to have an okay family setting or an okay family situation. And not everybody's going to have that kind of growth and improvement. I certainly didn't think she would, but she did. And I was like, well, and I also acknowledged to her that it definitely took a lot of, growth on her side to even reach out to me, to even have the conversation, to even try. And we weren't having it verbally. We had it all through email, which is fine. I'm much better when I have to communicate emotions in written form than I am verbally, because as an empath, I can get very charged very quickly. And when I write, I'm much more composed and my thoughts come together more clearly, and I'm able to articulate them in a way that is not so emotionally charged and also allows me to hopefully not emotionally charge the other person. So, if there's other ways that you need to communicate with people that are easier for you, then take that approach. So understand what boundaries is. Number one, identify the things that you definitely feel are boundaries for you, the things that you feel are unacceptable in your life, and who are the major players tied to that. Two, identify what the boundary is that you need to put in place. And then identify if it's a boundary that you need to verbalize or just simply put in place. And then three, figure out what you're going to do to enforce that boundary. A lot of times that enforcing one is where people fall apart and they don't actually want to enforce it. It's like, well, I wanted to tell you my boundary and I wanted you to respect my boundary, but I don't want to have to go to the drastic means to actually enforce my boundary, because that means a couple other things. It's that enforcement. The enforcement of your boundary is what is critical. So if you can get to that point, then you're going to have amazing growth. You're going to find that anxiety you have within yourself and anger that you may have starts to go away. And that's really the key, right? We all want to kind of find a sense of peace and, content and be able to navigate life a lot easier. So I hope this helps with your own boundary setting, and I'll see you in the next video.